Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film a recent reads video. And this is going to be my vacation edition of my recent reads. So recently, the end of March, first few days of April, I was away on vacation. It was lovely and relaxing. I had a fabulous time, and I read 7 books while I was gone. So I would like to talk to you about those books today. And because there's 7, I will not be, I'll try not to be too long-winded about them all. But the good thing about my vacation time period was that I had finished all my sort of project reading that I needed to do for the month of March. So I had finished my BookTube prize reading, I had finished my book naturalist reading, I had no buddy reads going on, so I could free myself to read whatever I wanted to. And because I was traveling away from home, I was mostly focused on my Kindle and the things that are on my Kindle, which are a lot of things that sometimes I ignore in favor of my physical books. I did read 2 physical books as well. I don't have these to show to you because I left them in the vacation place. I finished them and left them for other people to enjoy where I was. So what did I read? I did a lot of genre reading, so let's just get into it. The first book that I completed was Akata Warrior by Nndei Okorafor. This is book 2 in a young adult fantasy series that is sort of based on African mythology. We follow Sunny, who is an American-born Nigerian who has moved back to Nigeria with her family, and has, in the first book, she discovers she's a member of this magical community called the Leopard Society. And so she learns that in the first book, and she sort of is in this magical school type situation in the first book. And then in the second book, it's a continuation of that story where Sunny is learning how to deal with her magical powers. And there's, of course, a big baddie for her to have to deal with and battle and to save humankind. And it is very fast-paced and very interesting. And like I said, because it's based on African mythology, it is very different from other types of fantasy novels that I have read. And I very much enjoy it. Sunny is a great character. She has this group of friends who are also really fun. She has a mentor who is sort of crotchety and not very patient that I really enjoy. And just being a part of this world is really interesting because it's sort of partially set in modern day Nigeria and partially set in this magical realm. So really fun book, enjoyed my time with that. The second thing I completed was Forgotten in Death by J.D. Robb. This is the 53rd book in the Eve Dallas mystery series, which are futuristic police procedurals. And you've heard me talk about this series multiple times before, so I won't belabor the point. I just love that. I love the characters. I love Eve, and I love the cast of characters that she's surrounded with. And it just was a wonderful vacation read to follow on with my favorite characters as they deal with this mystery that they have to solve. And actually the mystery in this one was really, there were two murders, 2 bodies that were found in this sort of construction area. And one was, one of the bodies had been killed like quite a long time ago. And so there was sort of this modern day mystery to solve, and then a sort of an older historical mystery to solve. And so I really enjoyed both of those storylines, and it was a great addition to the series. The third book I finished was Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. And this is a book that had been, it was a physical book on my TBR, and had been on my shelves for quite a while, although not in the ancient TBR category. And it's science fiction. And in this story, we're following our main protagonist, Jemisin, who is a physics professor, and he is married and has a teenage son. And one night he has been out and visiting with an old friend. And on his walk back home, they live in Chicago, on his walk back home, he is knocked unconscious, and when he wakes up, he is in a place that he does not recognize, amongst people that he does not recognize, but they recognize him, and they say he is not who he thinks he is. And so the big main question of the story is, are you happy with your life? Are you happy with the direction that your life has taken? Are you happy with where you are now? Are there things that you would go back and change if you were given the opportunity? Or would you fight to keep the life that you currently have, even if that life maybe wasn't successful in terms of your career or in terms of like great status or anything like that. Like, what are the things that are most important to you in your life? There's a lot of, this is sci-fi, and I don't want to go into why it's sci-fi because I think that will be spoilery, but there was an awful lot of things relating to physics that I just had to shut my brain off and not try to think about too hard because it was very confusing to me. But I really enjoyed the story of this man, Jason, and his trying to get back to the life that he had previously and how he thought about that life and what he realizes is important to him, even as he thinks back over the choices that he has made along the course of his life. I found all those questions and thinking really interesting, and it is a very fast-paced, plot-driven story, and so you're not bored, you're just kept moving along. It was one of those books that's perfect to read on vacation because you're just constantly like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? So that was a fun read as well. Although I will say the physics stuff, straight over my head. So as long as you read it and you don't like try to think too hard about how this is working, I think you'll be all right. The next book I completed was one that I've been wanting to read for a really long time. It's been on my Kindle for a while, and for whatever reason I haven't picked it up, and I'm so glad I did, and that is Razorblade Tears by S.A. Crosby. And I had bought this on like a Kindle deal a long time ago, and it's just been languishing. And I've heard tons of good things about it, and so I thought it would be a book that I would enjoy, but I really loved this book. So this is a story about Ike, who is a black man who is married and has a family, and Buddy Lee, who is white and does not have a family yet, but they both have sons, and their sons are married to each other. And the dads are estranged from their sons over the fact that their sons are gay. Like, they did not deal well with the idea that their sons were gay and were marrying each other. And so the beginning of the story, you find out the two sons have been murdered. And it's really clear that the police are not going to like put a lot of effort into trying to figure out what happened to these two gay men. And so the fathers, Buddy Lee in particular, sort of guilts Ike into like looking into what happened to their sons. There's this sense of maybe a sense of guilt, maybe a sense that they failed their sons and that they can somehow atone for their behavior when their sons were alive by looking into what happened to them, you know, when they were killed. And so the thing to know about Ike and Buddy Lee is they're both felons. They both previously were in prison. They both done some really horrific things in their past. So Ike and Buddy Lee are not particularly good men. Like they have been bad men in the past. And they have tried to sort of live life by their own moral code, but they still have done things that are very, very wrong. So they decide to go ahead and try to find out what happened to their kids. And then, like, oh my God, the violent action begins. So this book is like a buddy cop movie flipped because it's the criminals that are the buddies, and also on speed, and also extremely violent. And it was a wild ride, and I loved every minute of it. I loved the exploration of Ike and Buddy Lee's relationship, because Buddy Lee is like many white people in that he is unconsciously racist, and Ike keeps calling him out for it. And Buddy Lee is at the point in his life where he's like, you know what? I never thought about how that is racist. This thing that I just said is racist. And yeah, I'm sorry. I said that and I shouldn't have. And like that sort of interaction that's just very day to day. And Ike never gets like violent about it. He's just like, dude, that's racist. Stop doing that. And Buddy Lee being like, oh, yeah, I never thought about it, but you're right. It is racist. I got to stop that. And the both of them coming to their realization about their prejudices about homosexuality and the ways that they mistreated their own children, and the mistakes that they made in their relationships with women, and the mistakes that brought them to being put in prison. On the flip side of that, they're perpetuating violence against the people that they're trying to track down, that they think have harmed their kids. So like there's this weird juxtaposition of like people like starting to realize their own bad behavior and how to change that, and then also being horribly violent against other people, even though the people that they're being horribly violent to deserve it. I'm not saying that. It's just a crazy it's just a crazy wild ride, and it's almost like this surreal, like a surreal look at the world. If people were trying to make things right, but by doing it the wrong way. So I don't know. I probably just described that really horribly, but if you can stand if you're not like particularly turned off by really violent movies or really violent stories, like I would really recommend that you give Razorblade Tears a try, because I thought it was just an excellent story with a lot of heart and a lot of action, and it was a super fun read, and I'm really glad that I finally picked it up. The next book I read was like completely the opposite, and it was again another physical book from my TBR, and it was Remarkable Creatures by Tracy Chevalier. And this is historical fiction. It takes place in the 1800s in England, and our characters are Elizabeth Philpott is one of our narrators, and she is a spinster lady from London who, because of impoverished circumstances, is like moved out to the countryside. And where she ends up is along the coast of England, where at this time fossils were starting to be found. So I think it's like the southern coast of England. I forget the name of the town exactly, but it's a very well-known fossil area. Anyway, so her brother gets married, and he has 3 unmarried sisters who don't appear to ever going to be married. So he's like gently like, okay, you guys have got to go live somewhere else where it will be cheap for me to house you and feed you and clothe you, but you won't be in this house with me and my wife. And so he sort of pushes them out into this like much smaller house, much reduced circumstances, and they have to learn to live together, the 3 sisters, in this country place, and learn to find something to do with themselves for the rest of their lives. They're not particularly old women. They're all in their 20s and 30s. So maybe even all in their teens and 20s when the book first starts. So they're not old women. They've got a long life ahead of them to figure out what to do with themselves in this tiny seaside town. The other main character is Mary Anning, who is a child when her and Elizabeth first meet, and she has a talent for finding fossils. And she turns that talent into a business-making opportunity in order to support herself and her family, because they are extremely poor. And so Elizabeth and Mary like sort of come together in friendship or their shared passion for fossils, because Elizabeth becomes passionate about fossils. It becomes the thing that she latches onto in order to give her life meaning. So over the years, they develop this friendship. They develop sort of a business partnership at times. And so you see this female friendship and all its ups and downs. It's competitiveness. It's, you know, they have problems with each other. They have fallouts. They come back together. All of that stuff. Beautiful female friendship. And you also see the role of women at this time in society and what women were allowed to do and what women were allowed to become and what they weren't allowed to do and weren't allowed to become. And so I found that part really interesting. This idea of, at this particular time in history, like women were not taken seriously. Women had a certain specific place in society that they were expected to remain within. And there were some other women characters in the story, particularly Mary's mother, who sort of steps outside of the generally accepted role for women in order to support her family and to make sure that they, you know, can survive. And I just found that all really, really interesting and really well done. And it was just a lovely story, well told. So that was a good one as well. I next finished The Broken Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin. This is book 2 in the Inheritance trilogy. It is a fantasy novel. And this one was just a fun romp. I enjoyed it more than I did book 1, actually. But it takes place in this kingdom where gods walk amongst the people, and they're not always recognizable, but sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. And there is one ruling class of humans that have sort of tried to keep the gods down so that they can have the power and control. But this story is really sort of outside of the power, for the most part, outside of the power struggles of the gods and the ruling class in this world. And our main character is Ori, who is a blind artist. And she takes in, at the start of the story, she takes in a homeless man who glows. And he seems to have a peculiar ability to die and then come back to life. And so Ori sort of realizes this after she takes him in and tries to help him. And he's also not very nice to her. Like, he's just really grouchy, and he barely ever talks. And he doesn't seem to be particularly grateful that she's providing him with a roof over his head and food to eat. And so we see what happens with that relationship and how Ori sort of realizes the abilities that she has within herself and sort of gets dragged into some political maneuvering that is happening amongst the gods and this ruling class. And Ori is a fantastic character. She is really, really great. I really found her a character that I wanted to root for. And the way that art is woven into her storyline and how her power manifests itself through art was particularly interesting and well done as well. So again, it's a book 2 in a trilogy, so I don't want to go into it too much. N.K. Jemisin is a really great fantasy author, and so if you if you read the Broken Earth trilogy and you liked it, I would definitely recommend trying the Inheritance trilogy as well. And then the last book I finished was a nonfiction book, and it was a book that I first heard about from Brian over at Bookish, and was a book that I was like, okay, I want to read this book after I heard him talk about it. And the name of the book is Robert E. Lee and Me by Ty Seiburn. And Ty Seiburn is he may be retired now, but he had a career in the U.S. Army and was a professor of history at West Point. I believe that's right, West Point, yes. And so, he is a white man who grew up in Virginia in the South, and who he idolized Robert E. Lee. He wanted to be that stereotypical Southern gentleman. He didn't really think of becoming an army officer. That sort of happened after his childhood. He sort of fell into that. But he always wanted to be a Southern gentleman, and he idolized Robert E. Lee as the epitome of Southern gentleman and like what every Southern white boy would hope to be like. And then Ty Seiburn takes that mythology apart, piece by piece, throughout this book. And it was really, really well done. Because of his experience growing up in Virginia, he really was steeped in this this mythology that has been built around Robert E. Lee since the Civil War. And so he goes through every aspect of that mythology in this book and sort of pulls it apart and shows how it is just completely not true. This idea that Robert E. Lee, he was a slave owner, and he was a slave owner who was unapologetic about it. He was an American Army officer who had just been promoted when he resigned his commission and left to go serve in Virginia as after Virginia seceded from the Union before the Civil War. He said, yeah, I've had this career with the U.S. Army. I'd been given this honor of getting this promotion. I'm done with this. I'm going to go fight with these rebels to preserve slavery. Ty Seiburn goes through the whole idea of this mythology that has been constructed that Civil War was fought for states' rights, and shows how that in the actual written words from each of the states that seceded from the Union, they say clearly in words, in black and white, that they are seceding to preserve their right to have slaves, so their right to perpetuate slavery. So, he just goes through all of these things. Monuments, he talks about monuments and the mythology surrounding monuments of Confederate statues in the South and in other places in the United States, because this mythology does not just exist in the southern part of the U.S. It exists all over the country, and it has been perpetuated all over the country. The Confederate flag, he talks about the history of that. He talks about monuments and the history of those. Just every aspect of the lost cause mythology, and Robert E. Lee himself, he discusses. And it was eye-opening. And I have read a lot of stuff about our history in this country in terms of slavery and racism. I just read How the Word is Passed couple months ago. Fantastic book that I loved. This book is a really excellent companion to that book because it goes into a lot of the same topics, but just in more depth and from the perspective of tearing down this mythology step by step. I will say that my only disappointment with this book was it could get repetitive, and it could, I think that he maybe just, like I said, it was repetitive, so he just dragged it out a little bit too long. I think he could have shortened it up, made his points, you know, and then moved on without sort of reiterating those points over and over again in some cases. So, but very readable for the most part, except for the repetitiveness, and also just a lot of information that I did not know anything about because I didn't know very much at all about Robert E. Lee. So that was excellent, and I'm really glad that I, again, got to that one that was on my Kindle. So those are the 7 books that I read while I was on vacation. I feel really pleased that I read so many, but also it was a very relaxing vacation. You know, if you read 7 books while you're on vacation, you had a lot of time to relax. So that was perfect. It's exactly what I was looking for. And I am just really grateful to have had the opportunity to do it. So anyway, those are my recent reads. I hope you're all doing well and finding some great books to read. I will talk to you later.